Hello and welcome to another Mr. Carter Science Special. In this video we're going to be looking at the chemistry of food, the nutrients you eat, the molecules that they are made out of, and why the body needs those particular nutrients. So the first thing we need to understand is what a balanced diet is. This plate in front of you here is known as an Eat Well plate, and it's an idealized plate showing you what you should be eating for every meal. A third of the food you eat, for example, should be fruit and vegetables. A third should be breads, rice and pastas containing the carbohydrates. And then the final third should be made up of non-dairy sources of protein and milk and dairy foods, which will contain various minerals that you need as well as proteins. A tiny amount of that should be made up of fats and sugars. So what is a balanced diet? Well, a balanced diet means eating all the correct nutrients in the correct amounts. For example, lots of vitamins and minerals, but only a small amount of fats. So what nutrients should we have in our diet? Well, there are technically 5 nutrients, but we're including a list of 7 here. We have proteins, carbohydrates, fats, and vitamins and minerals, and those are the 4 or 5, depending on how you define it, nutrients that we need in our diet. But very important are also fibre and water, which, although technically not nutrients, we're going to include in our list anyway. So why do we need each of these? Well, proteins, which are found in red meat, chickens, fish, nuts, beans, they are needed for growth and repair. And that's a common thing you'll be asked about in your exams, so make certain you memorize that sentence. Proteins are needed for growth and repair. Fats and oils, which are found in fried foods, fast foods, chips, burgers, etc., pizzas. We need the fats because fats are an energy store. Fats are also an insulator, which means they stop the body from losing heat, so they keep you warm. The third major nutrient are the carbohydrates. There are 2 types of carbohydrates. There are the complex carbohydrates like starch and the simple carbohydrates like sugars. And we find these carbohydrates in pastas, rice, potatoes, breads. Carbohydrates are needed as an energy source. And that's different from an energy store. For example, the glucose is used in respiration to release energy. It can then be used by your cells for a variety of different jobs like active transport or protein synthesis. We did mention 2 other nutrients that we need. Fibre. Now, fibre, although not digested by your body, and you cannot absorb fibre because we don't have the correct enzymes to break it down. Fibre is in effect the cell walls of plants, and we don't have an enzyme to break down the cellulose that those cell walls are made out of. But we do need a large amount of fibre in our diet, and we find it in fruit and vegetables. And fibre will help food move through the digestive system in a process known as peristalsis. So if you think of your small intestine as a tube, then you get a wave of muscle contraction, one after the other, pushing the food through. And that wave of muscular contraction is known as peristalsis. But the muscles of the small intestine need something to squeeze and move through, and that thing is fibre. Fibre also helps you to poo, egestion. In effect, it keeps you regular. And fibre will also help to prevent cancer of the large intestine. So it is very important that you have a large amount of fibre in your diet. We also need water in our diet. Water will keep the body hydrated. It means that there's enough water in the cytoplasm of all your cells so you can dissolve all the various chemicals and molecules that you need to keep your cells alive and working. If you don't have enough water in those cells, you won't be able to dissolve some of those chemicals. They'll crystallize out, and that can damage and destroy your cells. So let's just concentrate for a moment on the proteins, fats and carbohydrates. What are they made of? What molecules make up a protein, for example? Well, as you can see in the diagram here, you can see that I've drawn my protein molecule out of a set of shapes that have been connected together, and each of those shapes is an amino acid. So proteins are made out of a long line of amino acid molecules all joined together, and that line of amino acid molecules will fold up into a very specific 3D shape. A fat molecule that you can see here is actually made out of two different types of molecules joined together. We have the glycerol molecule, and attached onto that there are 3 fatty acid molecules. So a fat molecule is made up of 1 glycerol and 3 fatty acids. So when it's digested, that's what it's broken down into. And carbohydrates. Now a carbohydrate, the name is interesting. We have carbo, which means that the carbohydrate molecule contains carbon atoms. Hydra, which means that the carbohydrate molecule contains hydrogen atoms. And 8. Anytime you see 8 attached onto a compound name, it means that that compound contains oxygen. So carbohydrates are therefore molecules made out of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen atoms. So if we think about starch, starch is a carbohydrate, and starch is made out of a long line of glucose molecules all joined together. You can see that there, each glucose molecule is joined together, forming this very long complex carbohydrate known as starch, and starch is produced by plant cells. The sugars itself, these are smaller carbohydrate molecules, and there's many different sugars: sucrose, fructose, galactose, maltose. The most common one that we need to study in our course is glucose, and that's because glucose can be used in respiration. And as we've already said, glucose is a carbohydrate, so the molecule of glucose is made out of carbon, hydrogen and oxygen atoms. There are 2 other carbohydrates we need to think about for our course: glycogen and cellulose. Both are carbohydrates. Glycogen is made out of a long line of glucose molecules joined together, and glycogen is typically made by your muscle cells and by liver cells when they're storing excess glucose from your blood. Cell walls in plant cells are made out of a different carbohydrate known as cellulose, and again cellulose is made out of a long line of glucose molecules formed together in a very specific shape and structure to give the strength that the cell wall provides to plant cells. So we also have to consider vitamins and minerals, both of which are very small, so do not need to be digested. There's no need for an enzyme to chop up the molecule to make it smaller. So the vitamins that we need to look at are vitamin C and vitamin D. Vitamin C is found in citrus fruits like oranges and lemons, and vitamin C prevents scurvy. Scurvy is a disease where your gums start to bleed, your teeth fall out, your skin becomes very pale and your eyes become sunken. This is a disease that used to be very, very common amongst sailors several hundred years ago, when sailors would spend 2 or 3 months at sea with no electricity, no refrigeration and no way to store fruit and vegetables. They would rot, so they had no access to vitamin C. So it was very common for them to suffer these symptoms. Vitamin C prevents scurvy, so it's known as a preventative disease. But if you do not have enough, if you are deficient in vitamin C, then you might get scurvy, which is a deficiency disease. Vitamin D is an interesting vitamin in that we don't need to eat it. We get vitamin D from sunlight falling on our skin. The UV light rays promote the skin cells to produce vitamin D. And vitamin D helps prevent a disease known as rickets. And you can see here 2 examples of rickets. Your leg bones should be straight. But if you have rickets, then your bones tend to be weak and they tend to bend, as you can see in that X-ray there. So rickets causes your bones to bend. And the reason for this is that rickets is needed to help the body absorb calcium. Now calcium is a mineral found in milk and dairy products. It is the element calcium, and you need calcium to produce strong bones and healthy teeth. But if you do not have vitamin D, then even if you're drinking a lot of milk, you will not be able to absorb that milk, absorb that calcium into your bloodstream. So the two work together to prevent rickets. The other minerals that you need to consider is iron. Now, iron, like all minerals, is small and soluble, so it doesn't need to be digested, and it can be absorbed into the blood straight away in the small intestine. Iron is found in red meat and liver, and iron is needed to make the protein hemoglobin found in red blood cells. Iron, therefore, will prevent a disease called anemia. Anemia is a disease where you do not have enough red blood cells, you do not have enough hemoglobin, so you can't carry enough oxygen. Your cells won't be able to respire with aerobic respiration as effectively, so there's less aerobic respiration, which means there's less energy released, and therefore you will be feeling tired all the time. And that disease is known as anemia. But if you have iron in your diet, you can make hemoglobin and therefore more red blood cells and carry more oxygen around your body and carry out more aerobic respiration, releasing more energy. I hope you've enjoyed watching this video on nutrients. If you have, don't forget to like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you've learned. Thank you very much for your time.